I will be back shortly to give you the go-ahead. You can go ahead and begin. Thank you for your patience.
All right, folks, good morning. And we're going to get started here in a second. Let's call the case of the Estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Vic David Igam, and you feel free to call me Judge Vic or Judge, and that's fine. Scoring judges, you guys have done this before, so I'm not going to go over a bunch of stuff with you. Why don't we proceed in this manner? Let's have the attorneys do their announcements, and then we'll take up pretrial matters after that, and then we'll do opening statements. So if the attorneys want to announce who they are and what their plans are, who they're representing, I guess, if the plaintiff wants to begin.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Anaga Chandramoli, and today I, along with my co-counsel, Ms. Abia Bakai.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Mr. Darius Parak.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Represent the estate of the deceased in today's case, Genesis Petrillo. And Your Honor, after the defense introduces themselves, we do have preliminary matters to address.
No problem. The defense want to proceed with announcements?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Hattie Krivesky, and I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Ms. Malika John.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Mr. Matthew Schreiner.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, folks. Okay, I believe the plaintiff mentioned they have some pretrial matters that they wanted to take up. Let's begin. What's the first one?
Yes, Your Honor. First, we'd like the court to note we've had the clerk pre-mark exhibits 1 through 24 for the court's convenience, and both parties have stipulated that exhibits 1 through 10 should be admitted prior to trial beginning.
So noted for the record.
Next, we'd like to invoke Midland's Rules of Evidence 603 and 615, which respectively swear in all witnesses and constructively sequester all witnesses barring party representatives.
Are all the witnesses present on the screens?
Yes,
as far
Your
as
Honor.
you know? Okay.
Yes, as we know they are.
Okay. Well, then all the witnesses will raise their right hands, and do you swear the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I'm going to assume they all said yes. And the rule has been invoked, and that's the rule against comparative testimony. What that means is from this point onwards, the attorneys are the only ones that can talk to the witnesses. The witnesses cannot discuss their testimony either before or even after they testify with each other or anyone else. The only people you can talk to are the attorneys about your testimony. And until I release you from the rule, that will be the situation. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to inquire what your preferences are in terms of screen sharing demonstratives and exhibits with the court. Would you like us to ask permission each time or simply note our actions for the record?
If they're stipulated to previously, I think 1 through 10 have been stipulated to. I don't have a problem with screen sharing. If there's potentially objectionable material, I'd ask you to at least notify us prior to presenting it, and we'll do it constructively. If it's admitted, then it can be shared with the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Okay. Does the defense have any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. First, I would like to say we are advocating on behalf of Mr. Harper Martini.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Okay. Good morning.
And for the purposes of the Rule 615, our party representative in today's case is Harper Martini.
Mr. Martini would be allowed to stay with counsel then.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I'd like to draw your attention to case law, Deffendifer v. Schroeder. It is on page 3 of the case law. It states, in regard to the burden of proof, a plaintiff in a civil case must establish all elements of its claim by a preponderance of the evidence.
So noted.
Also, Your Honor, we'd like to draw your attention to stipulation 17, which can be found on page 2 of the stipulations page. This states that a canister of bug-off pesticide was found in the same dumpster in which Rapid River Valley Police Department found exhibits 2A and 2B. And for clarification purposes, 2A and 2B are the Carl wine bottle and label.
So noted if that's stipulated too.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed with opening statements.
All right. Plaintiff is announced ready. You may begin your opening statements. I just remind the attorneys, if you're not speaking, please keep yourselves on mute. And the scoring judges move to speaker view so that you can watch the attorneys in the full screen. And you may proceed with opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Remember the threats. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, as you hear from different witnesses and experts, we ask that you keep one thing in mind: the threats that the defendant made against Genesis Petrillo. This case revolves around them, and the evidence will show that the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo by poisoning their wine. It's June 7th, 2019. Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto's rehearsal dinner. Everyone at the event is thrilled to see them get married. Everyone except Mr. Petrillo's father-in-law, the defendant, Harper Martini. You see, Mr. Martini hated Genesis Petrillo. Genesis insulted him, his business, and threatened to take away his only child. Mr. Martini was furious, desperate to get rid of Genesis in any way possible. He threatens Genesis multiple times, but Genesis doesn't listen. Mr. Martini becomes obsessed. He even bribes Genesis with $300,000, but Genesis still won't leave. So the defendant did what he had to do. On the night of the rehearsal dinner, pretending to be a forgiving father-in-law, brushing off his threats as family drama, he gives Genesis a bottle of wine. Wine that the defendant has mixed with deadly pesticide. Poor, unsuspecting Genesis drinks this bottle of wine and dies of pesticide poisoning the very next morning, on what was supposed to be his wedding day. Members of the jury, that is why we are here today. We represent the victim, Genesis Petrillo's family, and we have brought one claim of battery against Harper Martini, so we hold the burden of proof. We have to prove each element of battery by a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is at the end of today's trial, if you believe that it is more likely than not, that's just 51% likely, that Harper Martini poisoned Genesis Petrillo, then we will have met our burden. And to do that, we will call 3 witnesses. First, you will hear from Angel Rodriguez, Mr. Petrillo's close friend. Mr. Rodriguez will tell the court that on June 7th, he saw the defendant carrying pesticide to the kitchen, right near where the wine is bottled. Mr. Rodriguez will also tell the court that the defendant directly threatened Genesis. "I will take you out the hard way." Next, you will hear from Danny Francasio, the defendant's old boss and confidant. He will take the stand and testify that Mr. Martini was trained about how deadly pesticides are, and that the defendant threatened Genesis multiple times, promising only one of us will survive this wedding. Finally, you will hear from Dr. Jimin Kwan, a doctor experienced in toxicology and the one who treated Mr. Petrillo on the night of his death. Dr. Kwan will tell the court that Mr. Petrillo showed all the signs of pesticide poisoning, that pesticide was found in his stomach, and that Genesis Petrillo's death was caused by pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, remember the threats. Those threats, along with the rest of the evidence, will show that the defendant intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo, which is why, at the conclusion of this trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Darius Parak, will ask you to hold the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Would the defense like to give an opening statement at this time or reserve their opening?
We would like to give an opening statement, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Members of the jury, may it please the court. False accusations and faulty examinations I'd like to talk to you about what happened on the night of June 7th, 2019. But what happened on that night was part of a greater story, a story with complexity. Complexity the plaintiff seeks to erase today. Several months ago, a wedding was being planned, the union between Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. There were many people involved in this wedding planning process, people who truly cared, one of which was Harper Martini, the loving father of Casey Soto. Throughout the wedding planning process, there were arguments. There were hiccups, mishaps, conflicts, but throughout it all, Mr. Martini remained persistent and hopeful that they can make amends with their new to-be in-law. And so, Mr. Martini hatched a plan to bury the hatchet, to start anew. His love for his child, Casey Soto, drove him to do this. And on the wedding rehearsal night, he made a speech for the late Petrillo and presented them with a beautiful bottle of wine. It was a gift and a speech that touched the hearts of all who heard it. He had hope for the next day, the wedding. But then tragedy struck. Genesis Petrillo had slipped into a coma and lost their life. But something else interesting happened after that. A rumor, a false accusation began to float around. The one that Mr. Martini had something to do with orchestrating this horrific death. But this claim that Mr. Martini had any intent to harm Genesis Petrillo is unfounded and unjustifiable. And we will be showing that to you through the three witnesses we call to the stand today. First, you will hear from Harper Martini himself, as he explains why these false accusations bear no merit today. He will explain how his love for his child, Casey, drove him to make amends with Mr. Petrillo, and how the real reason why the bottle of wine was contaminated was not because he put poison in it, as the plaintiff will try and tell you, but because it was thrown into a trash can that was surrounded by pesticides. Then you will hear from Dr. R. Cannon, an experienced and decorated medical toxicologist who will go over all the possible theories as to why Genesis Petrillo has lost their life. And Dr. R. Cannon will also go over all of the faulty examinations from the plaintiff's side and explain why Dr. Kwan's immediate assumption that pesticide poisoning was the cause of death is on shaky footing. And also why the plaintiff has ignored other reasonable explanations as to how the bottle of wine was contaminated. And finally, you will hear from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner, who was intimately involved in the entire wedding process and the wedding rehearsal dinner itself, and who saw Mr. Martini extend a beautiful olive branch towards Mr. Petrillo, and who, despite being present for the entire wedding rehearsal, saw no behavior from Mr. Martini to indicate any intent to harm. Members of the jury, we as the defense do not bear the burden in today's case. That solely rests on the plaintiff. They have several elements to prove to you today. First, that Mr. Martini harmed Genesis Petrillo. Second, that Mr. Martini had an intent to do so. And third, that Mr. Martini's actions are the reason Genesis Petrillo is no longer with us today. However, members of the jury, the plaintiff will not be able to meet this burden. I ask you to pay close attention to the witnesses they call. You will notice a common pattern. There is no evidence to indicate any act or any intent to harm Genesis Petrillo. And that's because there was none. Because of their false accusations and faulty examinations, we are on trial today. That is why, at the end of today's trial, my co-counselor, Mr. Matthew Schreiner, will ask you not to find an innocent man guilty. He will ask you not to find Mr. Martini liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. The plaintiff want to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Mr. Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
And this witness has been previously sworn. Plaintiff, you may proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
And Mr. Rodriguez, what do you do for a living?
I'm a kindergarten teacher right here in Midlands.
Now, Mr. Rodriguez, I want to talk about your relationship with Genesis Petrillo. Did you know him?
Yes, I met Genesis in 2016 through a mutual friend, along with Casey Soto.
And since meeting him, how long have you guys been friends?
We hit it off right away, and we were close friends for 3 years.
Well, let's start at the beginning. When did Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto get engaged?
That was the summer of 2018.
And what happened the night they got engaged?
A group of us celebrated by going to Casey's favorite place, a winery called Rosie and Pedro. By the end of the night, Casey and Genesis had decided every little detail of their wedding. I was even going to be the best man.
Did those wedding plans stay the same?
Actually, no. Things started to change once Harper, Casey's dad, took control.
Mr. Rodriguez, what changed when Mr. Harper Martini took control?
From what I observed while helping plan the wedding, a lot changed. For example, the venue was moved to Peony Estates, which is Harper's own winery. He even hired an event planner to take care of the wedding. And from then on, Genesis and Harper would not stop arguing.
Well, let's talk about the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner. Were Mr. Petrillo and the defendant arguing that evening?
Yes, Genesis and Harper would not stop fighting. Harper even told Genesis, "You should just leave and save this family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear."
How did Genesis react to the defendant threatening that he would make him disappear?
He confronted Harper, but Harper just pulled him out into the hallway.
Do you know what happened in the hall?
No, but when I saw Genesis after, he seemed terrified.
Now, did you see the defendant after that?
Actually, yes. I saw Harper in the hallway, heading towards the kitchen, holding a can of pesticide.
Did you ask Mr. Martini why he was carrying pesticide?
I did. And he said it was for pests like Genesis. And when I stared at him, he just tried to play it off as some joke.
After calling Genesis a pest, how did the rest of the evening go?
For a while, it was nice. We all gave toasts, including Harper.
And how did the defendant treat Mr. Petrillo during their toast?
Harper started being weirdly nice to Genesis. He even gave him this fancy Cara bottle of wine from Peony Estates.
Did anyone else receive this fancy bottle of wine?
No, Genesis was the only one. The rest of us received different wine.
What was the name of that other wine?
Horizon?
Now, based on what you saw, who drank the Cara wine?
I know Genesis did, and I had some too, but it tasted awful, so I spat it out. Other than that, I did not see anyone else drink that wine.
Now, besides the bottle of Cara wine, how much did Genesis drink that night?
Genesis was drinking a lot less than normal. When I partied with him in the past, he usually drinks a lot more without even getting hungover.
What happened when Mr. Petrillo finished the bottle?
Well, a little later, around midnight, I noticed that Genesis was slumped over in his chair. And I'd never seen him like that before, so I thought it would be best to get him up to his room to get some rest.
Do you know if he got any rest?
No, once we got back to the room, Genesis was sweating profusely and he even started vomiting. He looked so sick.
Mr. Rodriguez, did you try to help him?
Of course I tried to help him. I gave him water, but he couldn't keep it down. And before I knew it, he gasped for help before passing out cold on the floor.
Or did you call for help?
I called 911 as fast as I could, and an ambulance was there within minutes.
What did you do when the paramedics came?
I led them right to Genesis, and they started performing CPR, but it wasn't working, so they had to take him to the hospital, but I couldn't leave his side, so I rode with him in the ambulance all the way there.
After arriving at the hospital, what did you do for the rest of the night?
I stayed in the hospital, hoping, praying that he would be okay.
Did you receive any updates on his condition?
Yes, at around 8 a.m., I was told that Genesis had slipped into a coma, likely due to poisoning. I was in shock. I had to tell Casey.
How did you tell Casey?
I couldn't tell her in person. I couldn't tell her over the phone, so I went to find her in person at Peony Estates.
What happened when you returned?
I bumped into Harper.
Mr. Rodriguez, did you talk to the defendant?
No. Before I could say anything, he said, "Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding."
Had you told the defendant that Mr. Petrillo had been poisoned?
No. I don't know how he knew. I was the only one at the hospital.
What did you do after speaking with the defendant?
I found Casey and I told her what happened. And she immediately...
I'm sorry?
Witnesses' own statements can be hearsay.
Your objection is to hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Response?
Your Honor, this statement is not being offered for the truth of the matter, but instead to show the witness's subsequent actions.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rodriguez, would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
What did you do after speaking with the defendant?
I told Casey what had happened, and she immediately wanted me to take her to the hospital.
Now, what time did you arrive at the hospital?
We got there at around 9:30 in the morning.
What was Mr. Petrillo's condition when you arrived?
By the time we got there, we were told that Genesis had just passed a few minutes ago. We missed it by only a few minutes, and that was the most heartbreaking moment of my life.
Thank you. I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rodriguez, I'd like to talk about the wedding rehearsal night. At the rehearsal, you and Mr. Petrillo were drinking, correct?
Yes, Genesis and I were having a few drinks.
In fact, you remember that you'd already lost count of your own drink consumption, right?
Right, I was so focused on the rehearsal dinner going smoothly, I wasn't counting the drinks I had.
Later on, you witnessed Mr. Martini present a toast for Mr. Petrillo, correct?
Yeah, Harper toasted to Genesis, and called him a problem child, which is this really...
Mr. Rodriguez, going back to my question, you saw Mr. Martini present a toast to Mr. Petrillo, correct?
A mean-spirited toast, yes.
And then presented a gift, correct?
Some bottle of wine, yes.
Mr. Petrillo drank from this bottle of wine, right?
Yes, Genesis had some, and so did I.
And afterward, around midnight, Mr. Petrillo ordered tequila shots from the group.
Genesis ordered tequila shots for the group as a joke, but I didn't see him have any.
Yes, but you weren't paying attention to Mr. Petrillo the entire time, were you?
The entire night, I wasn't directly staring at him, but he was by my side.
But in that moment, you were busy talking to your friend, Mr. Mitsoukas, correct?
Yes, Drew. He's one of our mutual friends, also part of the wedding party.
Is that a yes or a no, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
So you don't know whether Mr. Petrillo did or did not drink tequila shots with the rest of the group, do you?
No, Genesis had no tequila shots.
Genesis drank no tequila shots.
Right, the rest of the group finished them.
Mr. Rodriguez, did you not just say that you were not sure because you had not seen Mr. Petrillo the entire night?
I wasn't directly staring at him, but he was asleep at the bar and I didn't see him have any tequila shots.
At this point in the night, you had also had some cocktails from the bar, right?
1 or 2, yes.
Let's talk about what happened later on in that night. Mr. Petrillo began to look sick, correct?
Yes, when I got him up to his room, he was sweating and vomiting.
You had to take him to the hospital.
I rode with him in an ambulance to the hospital, yes.
Yes, thank you. And when Mr. Petrillo slipped into a coma, you were still a little drunk, weren't you?
I felt so sick, and I didn't know if it was from being drunk or hungover or because of what was happening to Genesis.
Mr. Rodriguez, you were still a little drunk in that moment, correct?
No.
It is your testimony today that you were not still a little drunk when Mr. Petrillo slipped into a coma.
I was hungover, maybe drunk, but I don't know for sure.
You had been drinking all night, correct?
No.
That is your testimony today. You had not been drinking throughout the night?
I had 1 or 2 cocktails and some champagne with the toast, but I wasn't drinking all night, especially not when Genesis passed out.
Mr. Rodriguez, you were...
Sorry, we lost you there for a second.
Apologies.
No,
Mr. Rodriguez, you were not drinking throughout the night, despite just saying you had been drinking throughout the night?
No, because I stopped at a certain point once Genesis passed out. I stopped drinking for the rest of the night.
Regardless, Mr. Rodriguez, you can't tell us every single thing that Mr. Petrillo ate or drank that night, can you?
No, I can't.
Because you were not paying attention to Mr. Petrillo the entire night?
Not the entire night, no.
And you were still a little drunk at certain points, correct?
A little at certain points, yes.
After the wine bottle was finished, you didn't see what happened to it, did you?
No, I don't know where the Cara wine bottle went.
You never saw Mr. Martini put anything into this bottle of wine, right?
No.
You never saw Mr. Martini with pesticide that night, did you?
Yes, I did.
During the night, like on the wedding rehearsal?
The night of the wedding rehearsal, June 7th, I saw Harper in the hallway with a can of pesticide.
But Mr. Rodriguez, when the wine bottle was presented, you had not seen Mr. Martini with a bottle of pesticide in that moment, correct?
Not at the exact moment he presented the wine, no, but earlier.
Thank you. No further questions.
Anything else for this witness from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. May this witness please be excused?
May be excused. Plaintiff may call next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Mr. Danny Francasio.
This witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Danny Francasio.
Mr. Francasio, what do you do for a living?
I run Rosie and Pedro's winery. It's the premier winery in the valley.
How'd you get into the wine industry?
I lived on a vineyard growing up. My whole family's in the business. But I was pretty good at football and even ended up getting drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. Got myself a couple of rings and then I tore my ACL during training and I had to retire. So I joined the family business, and in that moment, I realized the game I was always meant to play was winemaking.
Mr. Francasio, do you know the defendant, Mr. Harper Martini?
I'm familiar with Harper. He used to work for me before he opened up his own winery. It's called Peony Estates.
What did the defendant do when he worked at your winery?
I hired him back in 2012 as a cellar hand. So he helped with the fermentation process and keeping the cellar clean.
So did the defendant ever have to work directly with pesticides?
Yes, he did. Midlands has a real bug problem, so we sprayed the wine cellar pretty regularly. Harper's job was to make sure that the wine was safe and covered when we used pesticides.
Mr. Francasio, was the defendant ever trained in the dangers of pesticide?
Of course. I mean, everyone needs to know the game plan. Employees aren't even allowed into the wine cellar until they've been trained in pesticide safety. Plus, I was careful to let my employees know how dangerous pesticides were if they were ingested.
Did you know Genesis Petrillo?
Yes, I knew Genesis. He was a regular at the winery, even a close friend of mine. I still can't believe he's gone.
Can you tell us anything about the defendant's interactions with Mr. Petrillo?
I don't even know where to start with those two. Harper left me multiple voicemails complaining about Genesis, and not to mention the time they went at it in my winery.
What do you mean they went at it in your winery?
Harper was screaming at Genesis. I mean, they were at each other's throats.
What was the defendant screaming?
He had a lot to say, but I definitely remember him threatening Genesis. He said, if you ever try to take my Casey away from me, it'll be the last thing you ever do.
You also mentioned that the defendant sent you voicemails regarding Mr. Petrillo. Would you recognize transcripts of these voicemails if I were to show them to you?
Yeah, I think I would.
Your Honor, at this time, may the plaintiff screen share Exhibit 18?
18, that hasn't been previously admitted, right?
No, Your Honor, just 1 through 10.
Okay, let's do that constructively and not show it to the jury till it's been identified and admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio, what's on the screen?
These look like transcripts of those voicemails that Harper sent me.
And do the words in these transcripts look accurate to what you heard when you listened to them?
Yes, they do.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 18 into evidence.
Defense, any objections?
And no objections at this time, Your Honor.
All right, 18 will be admitted.
Now, Mr. Francasio, directing your attention to Exhibit 18B, do you recognize this transcript from the defendant?
Yes, I do.
Now, are you aware of when Mr. Petrillo's wedding was?
Yeah, I actually received an invitation, so I know it was on June 8th of 2019.
So how long did you receive this voicemail before Mr. Petrillo's wedding?
About 6 months before the wedding.
And did the defendant mention Mr. Petrillo in this voicemail?
Yes, he did. He was talking about the election and then said, someone needs to shut Genesis down. I'd vote for that person no matter what.
Now, directing your attention to Exhibit 18D. How long before Mr. Petrillo's wedding did you receive this voicemail?
I got this one about 5 months before the wedding.
So 5 months before the wedding, did the defendant say anything to you about Mr. Petrillo?
Yes, she did.
What did he say?
She said, Genesis is like a cellar pest.
Objection, Your Honor. To cumulative evidence, the witness is simply reading off of evidence that's being presented on the slide.
Overruled.
Mr. Francasio, you can continue.
Okay.
What did the defendant say?
He said, Genesis is like a cellar pest, good for nothing, just making things bad wherever they go. They need to make a Genesis pesticide. I'd buy that.
Did the defendant mention Mr. Petrillo at all again in this voicemail?
Yeah, he also said, I swear, only one of us will survive this wedding.
Finally, directing your attention to Exhibit 18E. Did the defendant mention Mr. Petrillo in this voicemail?
Yeah, right there. Miserable, selfish Genesis. I've had enough. I'm beyond my breaking point. It's going to be me or Genesis, not the both of us.
When the defendant said that he was beyond his breaking point and that it was going to be him or Genesis, not the both of them, when did he say those things to you?
That was just a couple weeks before the wedding.
Thank you, Mr. Francasio. Your Honor, nothing further at this time. I pass.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio, you're the owner of a winery, correct?
Yes, that's right. Rosie Pedro.
A winery that has been ranked second in Midlands, correct?
Yes, sir.
Second only to Peony Estates, right?
Yes, that's right.
Harper Martini was an effective employee during his time working for you, right?
Yes, I like to think of Harper as my Tom Brady. He exceeded my expectations.
You even promoted him to manager, right?
Yes, that's right.
And Mr. Martini was instrumental in putting Rosie and Pedro's on the map, right?
He was the one that gave me the idea to have Rosie and Pedro's as a wedding venue. So yes, I would say so.
You even considered him family.
Yes, he was family.
But then Mr. Martini left, right?
Yes, I felt betrayed. Like I said, he was like family to me.
He started Peony Estates, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And he took Austin Lewis with him?
As well as half of my senior staff.
Right. And Mr. Francasio, Rosie and Pedro's wine orders went down after Mr. Martini left, correct?
Yes, our wine orders went down, our visitor numbers went down, but luckily we were able to bounce back.
And if Peony Estates were dissolved, then that competition would no longer exist for you, right?
Peony Estates wouldn't exist, but I'm sure there's other wineries that can compete.
But Rosie and Pedro's would be the #1 winery in Midlands, wouldn't they?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
I'll allow the witness to answer if possible.
Yes, Your Honor.
Re-asking my question, Rosie and Pedro's would be the #1 winery in Midlands, wouldn't they?
I have no idea of knowing. It's the magazines that do the rankings.
Right. Mr. Francasio, you've never been to Peony Estates, have you?
No, sir, I haven't.
So you weren't there on the night of the wedding rehearsal?
No, I didn't want to make it awkward for Harper. I got an invitation, but I decided to put Harper first.
And as a result, you never saw Harper Martini put anything into that bottle of Carl wine, did you?
No, sir, I wasn't there.
And you never saw pesticides at Peony Estates, did you?
No, again, I've never been to Peony Estate.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Anything else from this witness?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that Mr. Francasio be allowed to step down.
He may step down. Plaintiff may call his next witness.
Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Dr. Kwan has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Dr. Kwan, how are you involved in this case?
I was the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital when Genesis Petrillo arrived nauseous and vomiting. Despite our best efforts, Mr. Petrillo didn't make it. It was my job to come to a conclusion about his cause of death.
Let's take a step back. What trainings and qualifications do you have in the fields of emergency medicine and toxicology?
Well, I received my medical degree from UNC Chapel Hill, and I completed my residency at Emory University. Since then, I've been working in the ER, and I've even published a few articles on the subject.
Turning your attention back to this case, how did you treat Mr. Petrillo when he came to your hospital?
I use the standard procedures of emergency medicine. We start by examining the patient, which includes noting all of their symptoms. We then run tests like blood tests or toxicology panels before diagnosing and treating the patient.
And were these procedures sufficient to come to a conclusion about the manner of Mr. Petrillo's death?
Yes, after examining, treating, and diagnosing Mr. Petrillo, I concluded that he died as a result of pesticide poisoning. The most likely source of that pesticide was the wine he drank on the night of June 7th.
Let's start with the first step of your procedure, examine. How did you examine Mr. Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor. Under 702, this witness has not been qualified as an expert. We have not heard that these principles of his have been reliably applied to today's case.
I think the question just calls for his examination at this point. So I'm going to overrule that objection and let him answer the question as far as his examination goes.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, how did you examine Mr. Petrillo?
When Mr. Petrillo arrived, he was already in pretty bad shape. We immediately started listing all of his symptoms and taking his vitals. At first, it seemed like he was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
Your Honor, may Dr. Kwan share his screen for the purposes of a demonstrative? Opposing counsel has already seen this document.
Do you have any objections to the document?
No objections, Your Honor, but I would like to re-raise my objection that this witness has not been qualified as an expert yet. We have not heard that his principles have been reliably applied. Therefore, he should not be able to show demonstrative or exhibits yet.
I'm not sure what the demonstrative is. If it's going to be relying on expert testimony, we'll need to qualify him first as an expert. If it's something about the examination, I think he can testify as to that. Again, without knowing, you want to put it up on the screen and we'll say it's not shown to the jury at this time.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
So is this I guess an examination notation sheet?
Exactly. It's a chart of all the symptoms that Mr. Petrillo exhibited and then which conclusion, either alcohol poisoning or pesticide poisoning, they go under.
Okay. I'm going to overrule that objection if this is just observations that he made at the time.
Thank you. Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, what's on the screen?
This is a chart I made comparing Mr. Petrillo's symptoms to two possible diagnoses, either alcohol poisoning or pesticide poisoning.
What symptoms did Mr. Petrillo exhibit?
The early symptoms included nausea and vomiting, stomach cramps, difficulty walking, and slowed breathing. As the symptoms progressed, we also saw chest tightness and trouble breathing, contracted pupils and excessive tearing, involuntary muscle twitching, followed by slowed pulse, and finally seizures.
And what symptoms aligned with your initial diagnosis of alcohol poisoning?
The early symptoms, including nausea and vomiting, stomach cramps, difficulty walking, and slowed breathing. But as you can see, none of the more severe symptoms align with this diagnosis. For example, Mr. Petrillo's pupils were contracted. In the case of alcohol poisoning, you'd actually expect the opposite, for the pupils to dilate.
Did you suspect any other causes of Mr. Petrio's symptoms?
Yes, after years of working in the ER, I could tell that he was suffering from pesticide poisoning.
What symptoms were consistent with your suspicions?
All of them. From the early symptoms to the most severe, all of Mr. Petrio's symptoms aligned with a diagnosis of pesticide poisoning.
Thank you for sharing your screen, Dr. Kwan. And after you suspected that Mr. Petrio had been poisoned by pesticide, what did you do?
I immediately administered the antidote for pesticide poisoning. Mr. Petrio's symptoms were so severe that we were about to lose him.
Did the antidote work?
Unfortunately, no. Mr. Petrio fell into a coma and died at 9:27 on the morning of June 8th.
You mentioned the second step of your procedure, testing. Could you explain how you applied that to this case?
Of course. Shortly after Mr. Petrio's death, I received the results of two tests I had ordered, the poisons analysis and the toxicology report.
Let's start with the poisons analysis. What did those results tell you?
Analysis of Mr. Petrio's stomach contents showed that he had been drinking wine. By isolating the food particles, we found that they did not contain pesticide. Only the wine did.
Moving to the toxicology report, what did you learn from it?
The toxicology report showed that Mr. Petrio had a blood alcohol content, or BAC, of 0.16%.
How was the BAC relevant in your conclusion?
Well, the BAC confirmed what we had already suspected. Mr. Petrio was intoxicated because he'd been drinking, but the relatively low level of alcohol in his system would not have caused the severity of symptoms we saw.
Did the toxicology report contain any other important information?
Yes, it also showed levels of an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase.
What did Mr. Petrio's enzyme levels tell you?
Well, the enzyme levels were low. Just like smoke is a sign of fire, low enzyme levels are a sign of pesticides' effect on the body.
Let's move to the final step of your process, diagnose. Based on your observations and the test results, what do you believe is Mr. Petrio's cause of death?
I can say to a reasonable degree of science.
Yes, Your Honor.
Hold on real quick. I believe at this point, we'd carried over the objection as to his qualifications. Prior to giving a conclusion, I think you probably need to lay a foundation as to his expert qualifications in toxicology.
Yes, Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
Your Honor, Dr. Kwan has stated that he has worked in the ER for many years and he has encountered many cases that are involved with toxicology, including alcohol poisoning and pesticide poisoning. And he's also stated that his method, examine, test, and diagnose, is standard and reliable in his field. Therefore, we believe that the prongs of 702 have been satisfied.
Response from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. While that is the case, the D prong of 702 states that the expert has reliably applied those principles to the facts in today's case, and we have not heard evidence of this yet.
May I respond?
I disagree. I'm going to go ahead and qualify him as an expert at this time and overrule that previous objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, let's move to the final step of your process, diagnose. What was your final conclusion on Mr. Petrio's cause of death?
As I was saying, I can conclude to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Mr. Petrio died as a result of pesticide poisoning. The most likely source of that pesticide was the wine he drank on the night of June 7th.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, you're a part of Doctors for Organic Solutions, correct?
Yes, that's right.
In fact, you're on the board of directors for that company.
Yes, that's right.
And this group advocates against the use of pesticides. Isn't that true?
Yes, you're right. We advocate against pesticides as they pose a needless danger to public health.
You don't believe in using them for pest control, do you?
No, I don't. I believe they're extremely harmful to humans, and as a result, they should be banned.
In addition to that, you believe they're a scourge to the environment,
Yes,
and you want them banned from use altogether, correct?
as I said, yes.
Well, moving on, I'd like to talk about when you examined Ms. Petrillo in the ER. Mr. Petrillo had slurred speech,
Yes.
and some stomach pain.
Yep,
He was vomiting.
that's correct.
He was even breathing slower.
Yes, slowed breathing is a symptom that we saw.
And you initially thought that Mr. Petrillo was intoxicated, correct?
Yes,
And all of these symptoms that I've listed, they're consistent with alcohol poisoning. Isn't that true?
yes, those symptoms are consistent. However, some symptoms that Mr. Petrillo exhibited are actually in direct contradiction to a diagnosis of alcohol poisoning.
Well, I'm not asking about those other symptoms. I'm just asking about the symptoms he exhibited at first. Those were consistent with alcohol poisoning, correct?
Yes, but later symptoms arose that directly contradicted that diagnosis.
Well, after noticing these symptoms, you admitted Mr. Petrillo to the hospital, correct?
Well, he had already been admitted.
He had already been admitted? He wasn't in the ER?
Yes, the ER is part of the hospital.
Okay, so you immediately thought that Mr. Petrillo was suffering from organophosphate poisoning then, right?
Well, after we ran the initial tests, yes, I believe that he was suffering from pesticide poisoning.
And the only way to know this is by looking at acetylcholinesterase levels in the bloodstream, correct?
Well, yes, that is one conclusive test for the presence of pesticide.
And just to be clear for the members of the jury, acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme, right?
Yes, it is.
And enzymes can actually be lowered by having other drugs in your system, right?
Yes, but in Mr. Petrillo's testing, he showed there was no presence of other drugs. The only chemicals in his body included alcohol and pesticide.
They can also be lowered if you have a chronic disorder, correct?
Yes, that's possible, although these chronic disorders are extremely rare.
And acetylcholinesterase cannot tell you the level of organophosphate poisoning, correct?
No, it can't, but low levels of acetylcholinesterase are conclusive for pesticide poisoning.
Now, a person can be poisoned through organophosphates through skin contact, right?
Yes, that is possible.
And you read Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, correct?
Yes, I did. Mr. Rodriguez is, I believe, an eyewitness, and I was provided his affidavit as part of my review for this case.
So you would know that he also drank the same Carl wine Genesis had, correct?
Yes, I believe he drank the wine, but didn't swallow any. I believe he spit it out.
But he did have it in his mouth, correct?
Yes, it seems that way.
And it was touching his skin?
Well, the inside of the mouth isn't exactly skin, I wouldn't say.
The inside of the mouth is not skin?
No, it's the inside of the mouth.
Well, so what is the inside of the mouth?
I'm sorry, if you want me to go into an explanation of the biology and makeup of the human body, I can. Would you like me to do that?
No, if the inside of the mouth is not skin, there are other ways that pesticides can be lethal, correct?
Yes, that's true.
They can cause death through inhalation, right?
Yes, inhalation, skin contact, and ingestion are the main usual ways that pesticide can harm a person.
And isn't it true that even in small doses, organophosphates can be lethal?
Yes, small doses are extremely dangerous.
Now, going back to Mr. Petrillo, you ordered him to have an antidote for organophosphate poisoning, correct?
Yes, his symptoms were extremely severe.
And you knew that this test had to be administered quickly, right?
Yes, that's true.
But Mr. Petrillo unfortunately fell into a coma.
Yes. You know, lab testing often takes a very long time and delays can be deadly.
But Dr. Kwan, you had already given Mr. Petrillo the antidote before he fell into that coma, right?
Yes.
And Dr. Kwan, you don't know who's at fault for Mr. Petrillo's death, do you?
No, my conclusion only pertains to what caused Mr. Petrillo to die.
And you named the cause of death as pesticide poisoning before you got any test results back, right?
Yes, I listed pesticide poisoning as the cause of death because I knew that the testing would either confirm or deny this result. When the testing came back confirming that, I didn't need to change my initial diagnosis.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Redirect, please.
All right.
Dr. Kwan, why did you believe that alcohol poisoning was not Mr. Petrillo's cause of death?
Well, as I mentioned before, Mr. Petrillo exhibited symptoms that were a direct contradiction with a diagnosis of alcohol poisoning. His pupils were contracted. In the case of alcohol poisoning, you'd expect the pupils to dilate. This conclusively ruled out alcohol poisoning as the cause of death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross from the defense?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. This witness may step down. Does the defense have, or does the plaintiff have any more witnesses?
No, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests our case in chief, and we ask for a brief 5-minute recess if all laws will allow it.
Yeah, we'll give you 5 minutes, and remind all the parties that you're being live streamed on YouTube, so please shut down your video and your audio. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, folks. Will the scoring judges let me know if they are present? It's Mr. Haney and Miss Aziz.
Yeah, I'm here.
We're here and
Excellent.
ready to go.
All right. Is the plaintiff ready?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
We're
And
ready.
is-
Answer yes.
Okay, and is the defense ready as well?
Yes, Your Honor, we are ready to proceed.
All right, you may call your first witness.
We now call Harper Martini to the stand.
This witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Harper Martini.
Can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, I was born in Napa Valley, and then I moved to Midlands to study winemaking. And after I graduated, I toured the world. I went to all the famous wineries, and I met my wonderful wife. And shortly later, we had our beautiful daughter, Casey, together.
You mentioned Casey. Can you tell us more about her?
Yeah, Casey's a wonderful kid. You know, she's got a really big heart. She's always taking care of those who are in need. I couldn't be more proud of her as a father. The only time we'd ever disagree about her decisions was about her future with Genesis Petrillo.
Pardon, could you repeat that? My internet cut off. Apologies, everybody.
Yes, Casey's a really good kid, and I love her a lot. And I couldn't be more proud as a father. The only time we'd ever disagree is about her future with Genesis Petrillo.
Why did you disagree about their future?
Casey's always been a really, really good kid. And once Genesis came into her life, she started to make a handful of bad decisions. It's not that Genesis is a bad person by any means. He's a good kid too. I just don't think he's a good influence on my daughter.
What was a time that made you think that?
I was hosting a party at my vineyard, and Genesis dared Casey to drink a glass of all of our signature wines. Casey got so sick, she had alcohol poisoning, and she had to be rushed to the hospital. She nearly died.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor,
Expert opinion as to what?
Your Honor, as to the diagnosis of Casey Soto, as well as the fact that she almost died, this witness is not an expert in medicine and is not able to testify as to her prognosis on that date, nor whether she was close to death or not.
I don't think he's giving an expert opinion. That's just his opinion. I'm going to overrule the objection. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you ever raise these concerns to Casey?
Of course I did. But you know, she's young and the heart wants what the heart wants. So for her sake, I decided to bury the hatchet.
How did you try to bury the hatchet?
I hosted a party, congratulatory engagement party for Casey and Genesis. And at the party, I invited Genesis out to lunch so we could talk about our issues and hopefully get past them and look to a brighter future.
How did that lunch go?
It started really well. I congratulated Genesis for proposing to my daughter, and as a token of my goodwill, I said I would host the wedding at Peony Estates. From there, it started to go downhill when Genesis said that him and Casey were going to move off to France after the wedding, which upset me a little bit.
And why did this upset you?
I want Casey to take over Peony Estates after I pass. Plus, Casey and Genesis are family, and I love them. I'd be terribly sad if they left. But regardless of that fact, I decided to help plan their wedding.
Let's talk about that some more. What were your plans for the wedding?
I hired an official wedding planner, Blair Osborne, who I'm very good friends with, and a caterer who I'm also very good friends with, Sam Arnold. And I still had my misgivings, sure, but for Casey, I decided to continue to help plan.
Why did you continue to help plan, although you weren't a fan of the wedding?
I had this really good conversation with Casey a while before the wedding, where I realized that her and Genesis's relationship was very similar to me and my wife. And I didn't want to be that parent, that breaks up something beautiful. So for Casey and for Genesis, I decided to prepare a final peace offering and that could put all of our differences aside and look to a better future.
What was that peace offering?
I had been developing this new brand of wine for the past year, and I was really proud of it. And it's really similar in taste to stuff that Genesis has liked in the past. So I thought, what better than a brand new bottle of wine to usher in a new era of a healthy relationship?
And where did you present this peace offering?
I gave it to Sam Arnold, the caterer, to present at the rehearsal dinner.
How did the rehearsal dinner go?
It was stressful, as you would expect. Planning a wedding and trying to mend a relationship that you've neglected for over 5 years is incredibly hard work.
What did you do to try and mend this relationship?
Along with apologizing at the rehearsal, I had Sam present that bottle of wine during my toast. During the toast, I told some jokes, albeit they probably weren't funny, and I apologized. And at that point, I considered the matter to be resolved.
How was this toast received?
It was received really well. Casey, she smiled at me and she made a little heart with her hands. So at that point, a weight was just lifted off my shoulders. And for the first time in over 5 years of knowing Genesis Petrillo, I was excited to see him marry my daughter.
What happened on the wedding day?
The wedding day was awful. Around 2:30 in the morning, one of my employees called me and said someone on Peony Estates property had been rushed to the hospital.
Do you know who that person was?
I asked the employee and they couldn't tell me. But I suspected Genesis because I had seen him drinking a lot earlier in the night, and it wouldn't be the first time he got alcohol poisoning.
What steps did you take next?
I rushed to my son-in-law's room to make sure he was okay, but he was gone. All that was left in the room was that bottle of wine I had given him. And since it was empty, I just threw it away. Knowing what I know now, I wish I hadn't, but how was I supposed to predict someone was going to accuse me of poisoning Genesis?
We've heard that Mr. Petrillo was poisoned. How could the pesticide have gotten into the wine?
We use pesticides on our property fairly regularly, and my employees, when they throw the canisters away, it's quite common that they're not fully empty.
Where are those canisters thrown away?
We have this big communal trash can behind the property, and that's where they usually throw them away, and where I regrettably threw the wine bottle away too.
So how could the pesticide have gotten into the bottle?
Objection,
If
Your Honor.
you don't-
Speculation.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the objection?
Yes, Your Honor. On the grounds of speculation, this witness is asking, excuse me, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is asking this witness how pesticide got into the wine bottle. This witness doesn't know. That's what's in contention in today's case. And so this is speculation.
I'm going to sustain that objection unless the witness actually can answer. We're not asking him to guess at how it got in, but if he knows, he knows.
Okay. Mr. Martini, how could the pesticide have gotten into the wine bottle?
Those canisters of pesticide we use on our property, the bug off ones, if you let them tip over any bit, they leak like crazy. And I basically threw the wine bottle into a pool of pesticide. That's why I wish I had just left the bottle in the room.
Objection, Your Honor, again on the grounds of speculation. This witness doesn't know that that's how it happened. He didn't observe it with his 5 senses. And so this opposing counsel is asking him to speculate as to how it happened.
If I may respond, Your Honor.
Well, I'm going to overrule the objection. He's only testifying to what he did with the bottle. And he's not speculating on what he did. you can cross-examine on how, if that was the purpose of it. So it's overruled.
Mr. Martini, what is your response to the allegations that you are the one who poisoned Genesis Petrillo?
I want to say that I was falsely accused. I wish that I had been smart enough and I just left the wine bottle in the room. I could be cleared of everything. We wouldn't even be here if I had just left that wine bottle. But more importantly than that, Casey and Genesis were my family, and I loved them so much. I would never do anything to harm my family.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, I want to start with something you just said on direct examination. You said that you would never do anything to harm your family, right?
Yes, that's correct.
But prior to June 7th, Genesis Petrillo wasn't married to your daughter, was he?
I'd still consider him family once they got engaged.
But they weren't married.
No, not officially.
In fact, you didn't want them to get married, did you?
I didn't think it was Casey's best decision, but for her, I still let them get married.
I'm just looking for a yes or a no. You didn't want them to get married.
No, not until I gave my little wedding toast.
In fact, you spoke to Casey multiple times trying to get her to stop the wedding, didn't you?
Yes, I didn't think Genesis was a good influence on her.
Well, I want to talk about your knowledge of pesticide and wine. You're aware pesticide can be extremely dangerous.
Yes, there's a little warning label on the bottle.
In fact, you've actually seen what happens when someone drinks wine with pesticide in it.
Yeah, we had an spraying on our property, and I guess a glass got let out, and one of my employees drank from that glass.
And when you looked at that glass of wine with pesticide, you couldn't see the pesticide, could you?
No, I'm not a scientist. I can't tell that.
But you couldn't see it with your own eyes?
No, I can't tell the difference between things like that.
And you couldn't smell the pesticide when you smelled the wine?
No, I believe pesticide's odorless.
So, and you also knew that Genesis Petrillo enjoyed drinking fancy blends of red wine, right?
Of course, I'd given him a lot of wine in the past.
Well, let's talk about the fancy blend of red wine that you gave him on June 7th, 2019. He received a bottle of your unreleased 2019 Cara wine.
Yes.
And he was the only one to receive it, right?
Yes, I wanted a special present for a special day.
And every other member of the wedding party received a completely different bottle of wine, didn't they?
Of course, yeah. It was supposed to be a peace offering and fix our relationship.
That's right. It was a symbol of your new relationship, wasn't it?
Yes, of course.
Well, later that night, you learned that someone from your winery had been taken to the hospital, right?
Yes.
You thought it might be Mr. Petrillo?
Yes, because he was drinking a lot earlier in the night.
Well, you didn't go to the hospital to go check if it was him?
No, I rushed to his room to make sure, to confirm if it was him or not.
Well, that's a yes, you didn't go to the hospital.
No, I went directly to where he was supposed to be.
You didn't call the hospital to find out if it was him?
No.
You said you went straight to his room where you knew he was staying.
Yes.
You didn't see Mr. Petrillo inside?
No.
And at that point, you still didn't call the hospital to find out if he was there, did you?
No, I wasn't thinking straight. If my son-in-law was gone, I didn't know what to do at that point.
So is that a yes? You still didn't call the hospital to find out where he was?
That's correct.
Instead, you went into his room, and all that was in there was the empty bottle of Cara wine that you had given him.
Yes.
So you picked up that bottle.
Yes.
And then you ripped off the label, didn't you?
Yes, I recycle the wine bottle labels.
Is that a yes? You ripped the label off?
Yes.
That label was the only thing marking it as the 2019 Cara wine bottle, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
So then you took that unmarked bottle and you threw it in the dumpster, didn't you?
Yeah, I threw it into the pool of pesticide that was technically a dumpster.
Well, let's talk about why you gave him that wine and why you ripped off that label. Mr. Martini, you hated Genesis Petrillo, didn't you?
I wasn't fond of Genesis Petrillo. That's correct.
In fact, you had threatened him multiple times prior to June 7th, hadn't you?
No, I've never actually threatened. I've made jokes, but I've never threatened Genesis.
All right, Mr. Martini. Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to screen share Exhibit 24.
This exhibit been previously admitted?
No, Your Honor.
All right, until it's admitted, let's just say we're doing it constructively and not show it to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Martini, this is a note that you wrote to Mr. Petrillo.
Yes, it looks like it.
That's your handwriting on the note.
Yes.
And it looks like a true and accurate photograph of the note, right?
Yes, it appears to be.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 as evidence.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
24 is admitted. You can publish to the jury.
Now, Mr. Martini, you said, now it's still your testimony, you've never threatened Genesis Petrillo, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, in this note, you told him you needed him out of your lives.
Yes.
You told him that you wanted him to leave and that you would give him money if he left, right?
Of course, I wanted to pay for his housing and school for a year abroad. I wanted to, if he was out of our lives, I wanted to at least make sure he was comfortable. It's the least I could do.
So that's a yes. You offered him money to leave.
Yes, a substantial amount of money.
Mr. Martini, would you mind telling the members of the jury how much money you offered Mr. Petrillo to leave?
$300,000. That covers 1 year of rent in a fancy French apartment and a year of tuition in a fancy French school where he wanted to go.
So, Mr. Martini, you told Mr. Petrillo he could either take that $300,000, otherwise you would take him out of the picture the hard way. That's
Yes.
what you wrote?
Ever since he made my daughter drink too much, I've been considering legal action against him for endangerment.
So is that a yes? You told him that you would take him out of the picture the hard way?
Yes, with legal action.
But you didn't write you would take him out with legal action in this note, did you?
No, I wouldn't want him prepared for suing him, obviously.
So that's a yes. You didn't specify by legal action.
No, I did not.
And you told him he had until the 7th to leave.
The 7th is the day of the wedding rehearsal. And if he canceled by that date, I could get all of my money back on the wedding. If he canceled any later than that, I still had to foot the entire bill for it.
So is that a yes? You told him he had until the 7th to either take the money or you would take him out of the picture the hard way?
Yes, that's correct. I wanted him to either leave so I could get my money back.
And so on the 7th, after you gave him a wine bottle, Mr. Petrillo died hours later?
Yes, but those events obviously aren't connected.
I'm just asking chronologically, Mr. Martini. After you gave him that wine bottle, after the 7th, Mr. Petrillo died, didn't he?
Mr. Petrillo did not pass away on the 7th.
Right, after the night of the 7th, on the 8th, Mr. Petrillo passed away.
Yes, I gave him the wine bottle on the 7th, and he passed away sometime midday on the 8th.
Mr. Martini, you're happy Mr. Petrillo is out of your life forever, aren't you?
I'm happy for Casey's sake because I know she's safe. I am not happy by any means that Genesis lost his life. He was a great kid.
Mr. Martini, just to be clear, you're happy Mr. Petrillo is out of your life.
I'm happy he's out of our lives. I am not happy that he is passed. He was a great kid and he was family.
All right, Mr. Martini. Your Honor, nothing further at this time. I pass the witness.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Martini, I want to talk about that note. Can you explain what you meant?
Of course. As I said, those $300,000 was for a fancy French apartment and fancy French schooling for a year. As to the statement for a hard way. As I said, I meant legal action because he had poisoned my daughter either inadvertently, obviously inadvertently, not purposefully. I wanted to pursue something to keep him away from her for as long as possible.
No further questions. Thank you.
Any recross?
Sorry, Your Honor. No recross.
All right, this witness may step down. Is defense having next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Dr. Cannon to the stand.
All right, this witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Rex Cannon.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a medical doctor with expertise in both the areas of toxicology and pharmacology.
And why are you here today?
Well, I'm currently serving as a consultant at Gardner Consulting and was called to testify on my findings of the report by Dr. Jimin Kwan.
And have you ever been called to testify before?
Yes, I've testified in over 35 legal cases.
And as a consulting medical doctor, what do you do specifically?
Well, I look over any findings in the case, give a second objective take on what happened, in this case being the cause of death.
How did your educational background prepare you for your line of work?
Well, I went to The Ohio State University with a bachelor's in sciences in chemistry, attended Harvard Medical, graduated summa cum laude. I then took a faculty position at Midlands Medical, taught on toxicology there, and I subsequently left Midlands and academia to become an associate consultant at Gardner Consulting.
Have you ever been published in your field?
Oh yes, I've published over 50 articles in my field on toxicology, medicines, and other treatments.
And how did you become involved with today's case?
Well, I received and was able to review the report of Dr. Kwan, as I said previously, and specifically I was looking at what Dr. Kwan found to be the cause of death, any alternatives, along with evaluating any connection between Peony Estates wine in relation to said cause of death.
And did you have sufficient materials to come to a conclusion?
Yes, I was able to review Petrio's toxicology scans of blood and stomach contents, the sample from the wine bottle itself, the Midlands alcohol impairment chart, along with Dr. Kwan's report and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez.
And what were your methods in reviewing these materials?
Well, I use comparative analysis. It's the standard in my field of consulting, along with looking for affirmative and negative evidence in relation to that.
And could you explain to the jury what affirmative and negative evidence means?
Sure. Affirmative evidence means the evidence points to a specific conclusion, whereas negative evidence is evidence that isn't able to rule out alternative conclusions.
And what is comparative analysis?
Well, comparative analysis is simply looking at a case, comparing what we know as fact to what was reported in the given materials, and then drawing conclusions from that.
And did you reliably apply these methods to today's case?
Oh, yes, of course. I do it in any of my other cases as well.
And are these methods standard in your field?
Yes.
I'd like to talk about your findings. So what did your analysis tell you?
Well, the facts of this case seem to be consistent with some form of organophosphate poisoning, but there are several alternative explanations that simply can't be ruled out.
Well, what are some of these alternative explanations?
Well, one of them is what Dr. Kwan initially found, that being high blood alcohol concentration, that could have been the cause of death.
Could you explain what high blood alcohol concentration means?
Oh, sure. As Dr. Kwan noted, Petrio's BAC tested in the hospital was 0.16%. That's consistent with the symptoms they were exhibiting, but it's unlikely that a BAC of 0.16% could lead to death. However, we don't know what Petrio's peak BAC was that night.
Well, why do we not know Petrio's peak BAC?
Well, I learned from Mr. Rodriguez's affidavit that Petrio consumed no alcohol after 12:42 a.m. However, because Petrio had been drinking that previous evening, when they arrived at the hospital, their body would have already metabolized most of the alcohol in their system, and thus it's impossible to know what Petrio's peak BAC was that night.
And how do you determine a person's BAC?
Well, I actually brought along a chart that's used by medical doctors in Midlands to determine this very thing.
I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 23, which you should have in front of you, Dr. Cannon. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the Midlands alcohol impairment chart.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of alcohol impairment?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, 23 is admitted, may be published to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Cannon, what symptoms was Mr. Petrillo exhibiting?
Well, as Dr. Kwan noted that night, and similar with Mr. Rodriguez, slurred speech, stomach cramps, tightness in their chest, nausea, and vomiting. And as you can see from this chart, these are consistent with that 0.16% to 0.25% BAC range, which would fall in that darker orange high-risk range.
Well, what does that high-risk range mean?
Well, given we don't know what Petrillo's peak BAC was previously in the night, and given Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16%, after a long period of time and fell into the high-risk range, it's possible then that Petrillo was previously in the severe impairment range, that being 0.26 to 0.35% BAC.
Thank you, Ms. John. You may remove the exhibit. Moving on, what were the other alternatives for cause of death?
Well, it's possible Petrillo had an allergic reaction. Prior medical history doesn't support this, but it's also possible that hepatic disease played a role in his death. Again, prior medical history doesn't support this. The final possibility is that the pesticide that Petrillo consumed didn't come from the Cara bottle, as Dr. Kwan said.
I'd like to talk about this last possibility that the pesticide didn't come from the Cara bottle. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. I don't deny that there was pesticide found in the Cara bottle. However, there's no way to definitively prove that the Cara bottle contained pesticides when Petrillo consumed it.
Why is there no way to prove the Cara wine bottle contained pesticide when Petrillo consumed it?
Well, the bottle was tested 2 days after Petrillo drank the wine, and this gives the bottle 2 days of unaccounted time where it could have been contaminated.
How could it have been contaminated?
Oh, a multitude of things. I mean, the methodology in the testing could have had malpractice of some sort. If the bottle was thrown in a dumpster that contained pesticides, it most assuredly would have been contaminated. If any of these things happened, it would be highly unlikely that the bottle was the source of the pesticide in Petrillo.
Are there any other reasons you disagree with Dr. Kwan?
Well, if the bottle was indeed contaminated when Petrillo drank it, then I would disagree with Dr. Kwan.
And why do you disagree with him?
Well, Dr. Kwan mentions that the smallest dose of organophosphate exposure is lethal, and I learned that Angel Rodriguez drank from the bottle and said they spat it out. As any high school freshman in intro biology would tell you, the skin tissue on the inside of the mouth would have absorbed the pesticide. It's suspicious then that Mr. Rodriguez did not experience pesticide poisoning of any kind himself.
Are there any other reasons you disagree with Dr. Kwan?
Yes, there seems to be some faulty examination and conclusions by Dr. Kwan. He labeled Petrillo's cause of death as pesticides before he even got the results. Saying someone died of pesticides before getting lab results to confirm is like telling someone they have cancer without confirming test results beforehand. It's simply malpractice.
Now, Dr. Cannon, after...
Objection, Your Honor. Unduly prejudicial on the grounds of Midland's Rules of Evidence 403. May I explain?
You may.
Pursuant to case law Kane Software v. Mars Investigations, experts may only testify to conclusions that are included in their report. We have Dr. Cannon's report in front of us, and nowhere in that report does it state a conclusion about Dr. Kwan's handling of Mr. Petrillo.
I'm going to overrule that objection. You may proceed.
And Dr. Cannon, after reviewing Dr. Kwan's report, do you agree with his overall conclusion?
Well, I would agree Dr. Kwan's conclusion is possible. There are alternative and equally valid conclusions that simply weren't considered by Dr. Kwan.
And after utilizing your methods in today's case, what are your overall conclusions?
Well, while there's affirmative evidence that Petrillo experienced organophosphate poisoning of some kind, the negative evidence shows other alternatives like BAC, allergic reaction, and similarly, there's no affirmative evidence that the Cara bottle was contaminated when Petrillo drank it.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Cannon.
Good morning.
On direct examination, you stated that one of your conclusions is about Dr. Kwan's handling of Mr. Petrillo. Is that true?
Yes, but it doesn't matter overall simply just because the test results did confirm organophosphate exposure. I just thought it was mildly important to mention.
But that's a yes to my question. That's one of the conclusions you stated?
On medical findings, no. But
I'm
yes,
looking for a yes or no answer.
yes,
Yes. You included all of your relevant conclusions in your report. Is that true?
I included all relevant conclusions on medical findings in the case, in my report.
And that included 4 alternative causes of death.
Yes.
Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to share their screen?
Yes. What are we sharing the screen for?
We will be sharing Dr. Cannon's report that they prepared for this case.
Okay. Are we any objections from the defense?
May I ask what opposing counsel is using the report for?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Cannon has just stated that one of their conclusions is about Dr. Kwan's handling of the victim and the treatment of the victim. However, nowhere in the report does it state this conclusion, and we are simply demonstrating this fact for the jury.
We'll say you can present it, but it won't be presented to the jury.
Yes.
But you can, as if you were handing it to him to review.
Yes, absolutely.
We're not publishing it to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
That's fine.
Dr. Cannon, this is your report, is that true?
Yes.
And at the bottom of this report, you included your signature?
Yes.
Nowhere in this report does it state that you believe that Dr. Kwan committed malpractice. Is that true?
Yes, this report was on medical findings in the case.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Thank you, co-counsel, for sharing your screen. Dr. Cannon, let's move to your previous experience. You've worked for a consulting firm, is that true?
Yes, Gardner Consulting in Beverly Hills.
You've been hired to testify for the defense.
Yes.
Like you said on direct examination, you've testified in 35 cases.
Yes.
And of those 35 cases, you've only ever testified for the defense.
Yes. If I was called by the plaintiff, I would, if the consulting firm would allow it.
Dr. Cannon, you never examined Mr. Petrio's body, is that true?
I haven't. They cremated the body at the time, so I wasn't able to.
You only reviewed documents in this case?
Yes.
That included a 5-page report?
Yes, by Dr. Kwan and the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, along with most relevant exhibits to this.
That's true, so that amounts to about 16 pages of information.
Yes.
So you used about 16 pages of information to come to your conclusion?
Yes. In this case, along with all prior medical history and practice that I've done in my life, yes.
For that conclusion, you were paid $50,000.
Yes. That's the standard price for my firm.
Dr. Cannon, you have no idea how the pesticide got into the wine.
Yeah, I have no scientific certainty of how it got into the wine.
I'm simply looking for a yes or no answer. That's a yes to my question.
Sure, yes.
In fact, the only thing in Mr. Petrio's symptoms were food, wine, and pesticide.
Yes.
So the pesticide must have come from the food and the wine.
Yes.
And you're aware that at the dinner, all the leftover food and beverages were tested for organophosphate pesticide?
Yes, but if the food didn't contain organophosphates, then it would have been a Petrio system at the time.
Right, so none of the leftover food contained organophosphate pesticide.
Right, because it would have been eaten. Yes.
In fact, your conclusion is that pesticide is the most likely cause of death. Is that true?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be able to turn his camera off.
Witness may step down and defense may call their next witness.
Hello, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Miss Blair Osborne.
All right, and this witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne, but you can just call me Blair.
And Miss Osborne, why are you here today?
Well, I'm here because I was hired to plan the wedding for Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo for June 8th. I was actually hired by Harper Martini.
And how much experience do you have running weddings?
Well, I own my own event planning company called Bliss by Blair Events, and we started almost a decade ago. So I can't even tell you how many weddings we've done since then. I'm secretly a hopeless romantic, so they're my favorite events to do. We've actually won a couple of awards for our weddings.
Can you tell us more about your relationship with Harper Martini?
Sure. So when I first started my business, I wasn't very good at it. I would double book things all the time. And one day when I did that, Harper totally saved my butt and let me reschedule an event at her winery, Peony Estates. Ever since then, we've had a great professional relationship.
I'd like to talk with you more about the wedding planning itself. When did you first become involved?
So Harper hired me several months in advance to plan the wedding. Casey and Genesis didn't know that I was involved at first, but eventually they found out and I was so excited to plan with them. I always feel like Jennifer Lopez in the movie The Wedding Planner.
You mentioned that Miss Soto and Mr. Petrillo weren't involved in the wedding planning at first. Why was that?
Well, weddings can be pretty stressful to plan and can put a lot of stress on the happy couple, so I was just used to get things running in a professional way.
Can you tell us about the planning of the wedding once the bride and groom actually became involved?
Yeah. Well, I met with Genesis and Casey in January of 2019 to discuss all the fun stuff for the wedding, like the reception, the ceremony, and even the rehearsal dinner. We did run into a few complications along the way, partially because of me, but luckily we figured everything out before I met with Harper later on in the coming months.
I'd like to talk about that meeting you had with Mr. Martini. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, it was actually Harper, me, and Casey at this meeting. It was to discuss the decor options, which is one of my favorite parts to plan. But the meeting was a little bit awkward after Harper had played this voicemail that he had received from Genesis, and Genesis sounded pretty drunk.
And how did everyone respond after Mr. Martini played them this voicemail?
Well, Casey literally stormed out of the room, seemed pretty upset, and Martini actually said something along the lines of, one day Genesis is going to drink the wrong thing and it killing her. I was also a bit concerned about how drunk Genesis sounded, but I didn't see anybody until the rehearsal dinner on June 7th.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay as to the statement of Harper Martini.
You want to respond?
Your Honor, we're willing to agree that that statement is hearsay.
Sustained then.
I'd like to talk about the day of the rehearsal dinner itself. What happened then?
So that was June 7th of 2019. During the afternoon, it seemed like Harper and Genesis had gotten into some type of disagreement, but things started to look better when Harper really seemed to try and patch things up with this beautiful toast that he gave to Genesis at the rehearsal dinner. It made me hope that I got a father-in-law like that one day.
And what about that speech made it seem like Mr. Martini was trying to patch things up?
Well, he gave a wonderful speech to Genesis about joining the family and finally burying the hatchet. He even gave her this bottle of Cara wine. I started to tear up because of how beautiful it was.
What, if anything, did you see happen after Mr. Martini gave Genesis Petrillo this bottle of wine?
Well, I'm pretty sure I saw Genesis open the bottle, because it was closed before, and drink the wine, a couple of glasses even. I left it around midnight that night and saw Genesis still drinking with her friends at the bar. Of course, it wasn't until the next day that I found out Genesis had passed away.
And what do you know about Mr. Petrillo's passing?
All I know is that Harper is being accused of having something to do with it, which I can't believe. Harper loved Casey and would never do anything to hurt her. And poisoning Genesis would have done just that.
I'd like to talk about that bottle of Cara wine for a moment. Did you ever see Mr. Martini put anything into that bottle of wine?
No, I never saw anything like that.
Did you ever see Mr. Martini holding both the wine and a bottle of pesticides?
No, I never saw that.
Did you ever even see Mr. Martini with pesticides that night?
Not once, no.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Osborne.
Good afternoon.
I want to talk about something you mentioned on direct examination. It was on the day of May 11th, 2019.
Okay.
You were at Peony Estates to meet with Mr. Martini and his daughter. Isn't that right?
That's right.
During this meeting, they were completely silent.
They were. It was really awkward as I was flipping through pages of bouquets.
Exactly. They didn't speak to each other.
Nope.
And that's when the defendant played a voicemail.
That's right.
A voicemail from Genesis.
That's correct.
You heard the contents of that voicemail, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay at this time. We've already agreed that these statements are hearsay.
He hasn't asked for hearsay. Overruled.
And after playing back that voicemail, the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
I'd like to re-raise my objection to hearsay, Your Honor.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. I objected to hearsay on direct examination because that was being offered from opposing counsel with their party representative. This isn't hearsay where the plaintiff and we're offering this into evidence.
As it's not hearsay because
it's a admission from a party opponent.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
We were just going to say, Your Honor, that this was kept out of evidence on direct, and we would like it to be kept out of evidence here.
I understand, but it's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. One of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing, and it will kill Genesis.
That's right. I was pretty concerned about how drunk she sounded, too.
Ms. Osborne, I'm not asking you about Genesis' statements. I'm asking you about the defendant's statements. The defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
Yes, that's true.
And Ms. Osborne, I want to now talk about the night of the rehearsal dinner. You were at Peony Estates, right?
I was there, yes.
And during the toasts, Mr. Martini and Mr. Petrillo were insulting each other.
At first, yeah.
Later that night, the defendant gave Genesis a bottle of wine.
That's right, after giving a lovely speech.
Exactly, it was a wedding gift.
That's what it looked like to me.
It was a bottle of Cara wine.
That's right.
And after handing Genesis that wine, the defendant said, don't open this in front of other people. I want this special bottle to be just for you, right?
Well, actually, Harper's not the one that gave the bottle to Genesis.
Ms. Osborne, is it your testimony that Harper Martini didn't give Genesis Petrillo the bottle of Cara wine?
Sam Arnold, the caterer who was hired for the wedding, was the one that gave it to Genesis.
The defendant directed Sam Arnold to do so, right?
That's what it looked like, yes.
And after Sam Arnold gave Genesis that bottle, the defendant said, don't open this in front of other people. I want this special bottle to be just for you. Isn't that right, Ms. Osborne?
Yes, and then Genesis opened the bottle, so I was like, what? He just told you not to.
So that's yes to my question?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, a brief redirect of Ms. Blair Osborne. Ms. Osborne, you mentioned that you heard this voicemail from Mr. Petrillo, correct?
That's right.
Right. And what was your understanding of this voicemail?
Well, he sounded really drunk in it, and I just thought that Harper was talking about how drunk he sounded when they were talking about, him drinking the wrong thing.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions for Ms. Osborne.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
All right. This witness may step down. Any other witnesses from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this point in time, the defense would like to rest our case in chief and ask for a 5-minute recess if time allows.
All right. We got 5 minutes. Gather your thoughts and we'll get closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor.
I remind everyone we're on YouTube Live, so stop your video and your audio. All right, if Mr. Haney and Mrs. Z's, are you guys online?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, sir. Ready to go.
All right. Is plaintiff ready to proceed with closing?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense present?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You may open your closing.
Yes, Your Honor. Remember the threats. Members of the jury, at the beginning of this trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Abia Bakai, asked you to keep in mind one thing as you listen to the testimony. Remember the threats that the defendant, Harper Martini, made to Genesis Petrillo. And now that we're at the end of this trial, let's go through these threats, beginning with the message that the defendant left Mr. Danny Francazio in a voicemail. Someone needs to shut Genesis down, threatened the defendant. I swear, only one of us will survive this wedding. I need you out of our lives, or I will take you out the hard way, said the defendant in a handwritten note. Members of the jury, we know that these were not empty threats, because on June 7th, 2019, the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo. As the plaintiff in this case, we have the burden of proof. This means, as Judge David Nydam will explain to you in just a few short minutes, we need to prove three things. One, that the defendant, Harper Martini, intentionally put pesticide into the bottle of 2019 Cara wine. Two, that the defendant gave that wine to Genesis Petrillo with the intent to poison him. And three, as a result of drinking from that poisoned bottle of wine, Genesis Petrillo died on June 8th, 2019. Now, we need to prove each of these elements by preponderance of the evidence. Members of the jury, all that means is that we need to prove that it is more likely than not, just 51% more likely, that the defendant, Harper Martini, intentionally put pesticide into that bottle of Cara wine. Members of the jury, we've done that today. So let's go through these elements one by one, beginning with the first element, that the defendant, Harper Martini, intentionally put pesticide into the Cara wine. Well, you heard from the defendant's own boss, Mr. Danny Francazio. Mr. Francazio told you that the defendant knew. He knew that if you put pesticide into that wine, you couldn't see it. It was the jury, you couldn't even smell it. Mr. Francazio told you that the defendant was trained several times on the dangers of pesticide poisoning. And that's why you heard from Mr. Angel Rodriguez, an eyewitness who saw the defendant heading towards the kitchen with the bottle of pesticide. Because that's where the wine was kept. Everyone else at this wedding received the exact same bottle of wine, except for Mr. Petrillo. Remember the defendant's threats. Don't open this bottle. It's special. It was a special bottle that the defendant had previously poisoned. Members of the jury, the defendant's own actions gave them away. When Mr. Petrillo was being rushed towards the emergency room, the defendant stayed behind, ruffled through his things, found the empty bottle of Cara wine, ripped off the tag, and threw it into a dumpster. Now, the defense has said, well, because it was in a dumpster with pesticide, this means that that's how the pesticide got into that bottle of wine. But that doesn't explain how Mr. Petrillo still died of pesticide poisoning. It doesn't matter where that empty bottle ends up if Mr. Petrillo had already finished the contents. Members of the jury, that is proof by preponderance that the defendant intentionally put pesticide into that Cara wine. Next, we had to prove that the defendant had the intent to poison Mr. Petrillo. We heard from the defendant himself that he loved two things in this world, his winery, and his daughter. In fact, it was the defendant's greatest wish to see his daughter take over that winery. And then his daughter went and got engaged to the one man that the defendant hated most in this world, Genesis Petrillo. Mr. Petrillo was going to take the defendant's daughter away, move to France, so that the defendant would never see her again. Members of the jury, it sent the defendant into a spiraling fit of rage. The defendant became obsessed with getting rid of Mr. Petrillo. He even tried to bribe him, saying, "Take this $300,000 and leave, or else I will take you out the hard way." Members of the jury, remember the defendant's threats. One of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing, and it will kill Genesis. Members of the jury, that is exactly what happened. You heard from Dr. Courtroom, the treating physician for Mr. Petrillo, who said that as Mr. Petrillo was being rushed in, he showed telltale signs of pesticide poisoning, contracted pupils, troubled breathing, seizures, all signs of pesticide poisoning. The defendant's own expert witness, Dr. Cannon, agreed that the most likely cause of death was pesticide poisoning. We know that in Genesis Petrillo's stomach, there were two things: wine and pesticide. Members of the jury, that is proof by preponderance that Genesis Petrillo died on June 8th from pesticide poisoning. That night, Genesis Petrillo slipped into a coma. He died on what was supposed to be his wedding day. And we know who's responsible: Harper Martini. He was angry. He was desperate. Remember the defendant's threats. "I swear, only one of us will survive this wedding." Members of the jury, that is exactly what happened. We ask that you find the defendant liable. Thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Thank you. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. False accusations. Can you hear me, Your Honor? You can? Okay. False accusations and faulty examinations. Today's trial has been fraught with them from beginning to end. The plaintiff has argued that Mr. Harper Martini had something to do with the unfortunate and untimely death of Mr. Genesis Petrillo. And that false accusation has been based on the false examinations, both of Genesis Petrillo by Dr. Jim Kwan and of that bottle of Carl wine that was found in the dumpster behind Peony Estates. As we have seen, it is impossible for the plaintiff to meet their burden in today's trial. They have asked you to look only to the threats. But Your Honor, members of the jury, those threats don't prove an act. Those threats don't prove that Martini did anything. And as we will see, the converse is actually true, that Mr. Martini never put anything into that bottle of Carl wine and therefore should not be found liable. As a reminder to the members of the jury, there are three prongs of battery that they must prove by a preponderance of evidence. First, that there was an act by the defendant, Mr. Harper Martini. Second, there was intent to harm Genesis Petrillo from Mr. Martini. And third and finally, that there was actual harmful contact done to Mr. Petrillo by that bottle of Carl wine. But as we have seen, none of these have been met. Let's begin with the very first, why there was not an act by the defendant. Mr. Martini himself told us he never put anything in that bottle of wine. And more importantly, he showed us an alternate reason why that wine bottle would have tested positive for pesticides. Opposing counsel has asked you to ignore this alternative reason, stating that putting that bottle back into that container of that dumpster that had these pesticides in them would not mean anything in today's case. But Your Honor, the opposite is actually true. By putting that bottle of wine into that dumpster, there was insurance that pesticides would be on that bottle of wine. And we can see, Your Honor, members of the jury, that it is incredibly clear there is no way we can know for sure whether that bottle had pesticides before Genesis Petrillo drank it, because it was contaminated after the fact. This is the first faulty examination by the plaintiff, and it shows there was not an act. Not a single witness in today's trial was able to tell you that Mr. Martini put anything into that bottle of Carl wine. And as a result, the act has not been proven. But second, we not only saw that there was no harmful action done by Mr. Martini, we saw that there was no harmful intent on behalf of Mr. Martini. Mr. Martini attested that despite the rocky relationship he had had with Genesis Petrillo in the past, he did what was best for himself, for his daughter, and Mr. Petrillo. He humbled himself. He took that first step back, and he offered the peace offering that was that gift of a bottle of Carl wine. In doing so, Mr. Martini realized something, that in order for him to keep his relationship with his daughter, who he loved, he had to make up with Genesis Petrillo. And that was his attempt at doing so. We've seen that this harmful intent did not come about on that night of the rehearsal dinner. Only one of opposing counsel's witnesses was actually present at that time, Mr. Angel Rodriguez. And Mr. Angel Rodriguez noted that that gift was given in good spirits. So did Miss Blair Osborne from our side, from the defense. We have seen there was no harmful intent. In fact, there was the intent to make up and to fix the issues they'd had in the past for the betterment of everyone there. But third and finally, we've noticed that there was no actual harmful contacts to the plaintiff by the defendant in today's case, because the bottle of Carl wine did not actually cause the death of Genesis Petrillo. We heard from Dr. Cannon today, who provided a myriad of alternatives that could have caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. These included an allergic reaction, hepatic disease, alcohol poisoning, or an alternate source of the pesticides, that is, other than the bottle of Carl wine. We saw that Dr. Jimin Kwan ignored each and every one of these and decided to focus solely on pesticide poisoning, even stating that pesticide poisoning was the cause of death before he heard any results back from the lab. This was our next faulty examination. Dr. Jimin Kwan was too hasty, and he ignored all of the alternatives. Dr. Cannon also told us that the peak blood alcohol content this particular point in time for Genesis Petrillo was likely much higher than it was when he was admitted into the hospital due to the nature of the human body in metabolizing alcohol content. As a result, it is more than likely that Genesis Petrillo's actual cause of death was alcohol poisoning, which would have ended with the respiratory failure that was seen in Mr. Petrillo's case. Not only that, but Dr. Cannon noted that if Dr. Kwan was correct, that this bottle of wine was the source of the pesticide poisoning, then anyone who came into contact with that wine would have experienced the symptoms of pesticide poisoning. But we heard from Dr. Jimin Kwan, Dr. Cannon, and Mr. Rodriguez himself that Mr. Rodriguez experienced none of these symptoms after taking a sip of this bottle of wine, after there was contact with Mr. Rodriguez's mouth. And as a result, we can see that pesticides could not have been present in that bottle of Carl wine before Mr. Petrillo took his first sip. Overall, we have seen that Harper Martini did not take this action, that there was no harmful intent on behalf of Mr. Martini. And third and finally, that there was no harmful contact done to the plaintiff in today's case by Mr. Harper Martini. Today's case is a question of likelihood. So I ask you, members of the jury, which is more likely? That Harper Martini knowingly attempted to kill his son-in-law at the rehearsal dinner, and nobody out of a crowd of hundreds of wedding guests ever saw it happen, or that it was simply contaminated in that dumpster behind Peony Estates. Members of the jury, if there's anything that I want you to remember when making your decision today, it is this. Not a single witness was able to testify that they saw Mr. Martini put anything, much less pesticides, into that bottle of Carl wine. There was no act. Those threats were not really threats. And Mr. Martini never did anything to harm Genesis Petrillo. In fact, he sought to resolve his conflict with him. It is for these reasons why we ask you to find Mr. Harper Martini not liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo and for battery against Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Members of the jury, as Mr. Schreiner has just told you, the defendant needed insurance. That's why he put that pesticide into that dumpster filled with pesticide bottles. Because he knew that as soon as Genesis Petrillo drank from that poisoned bottle of wine, Genesis Petrillo was going to die of pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, ask yourselves, if there was no pesticide in that wine, how did it end up in Mr. Petrillo's stomach? We ask that you find the defendant liable. Thank you.
All right, folks. I'm going to ask everyone to hang on. You can obviously go on mute. I'm going to wait for the judges to submit their ballots, and once we get a response from the committee that they've received the ballots, then we'll have a chance to do some brief comments, and we'll make that brief. So if y'all want to hang on, you can mute yourselves, and as soon as I get notification, we'll get back on.
Judge Vic, just to give you an update, I've gotten my ballot submitted, but I've not received notice back from the tabulation room.
Okay, once you and Ms. Aziz receive that notice, if you want, just either say it orally or just send me a message, either way, and then we'll start with the comments.
I think I just got the tabulation rooms code GG 2020.
I just got it as well.
All right, sounds good. Let's get started with our comment then. Is everyone back on? And we're going to keep these brief. Mr. Haney, do you want to start, or Mrs. Ease? Either way.
Oh, it's your courtroom. You tell us.
Go ahead and go ahead and get started.
All right. I think it's worth mentioning to all of y'all that these rounds aren't judged based on the merits of the case or who proved their case. The several of these I've seen and done now, well over half the time, the team that would win in court is not the team that won on these ballots. So don't read too much into it. Don't take too much away from it. Everybody did good. There's really not a whole lot of point in me sitting and going through here and explaining everything that y'all did well, because I want y'all to get stuff to improve on. So if all you hear is negative stuff, that doesn't mean y'all are all horrible. I'm just trying to give you places to work on it. And by the way, forgive me on names. I'm the worst. I'm going to do my best. Malika John, is that correct? Yeah, so you obviously know what you're doing. You just don't look like you feel comfortable doing it. So just anything that can, get you out of your shell a little bit, and can put you in a position where, we're liking what you're doing and liking you personally too. And then just across the board, the less reading you can do and the more knowing what you're talking about and knowing where it comes from, the more conversational it feels. And especially on direct, a lot of them just felt really rehearsed. I take notes in this, comments form, and it's just on just about every one of them. It's just like, boy, this feels rehearsed. Looks like reading answers. And I kind of lose interest. It's like, if you got it all planned out, I'm not feeling a story. And that's really what these trials are about, is a story that I'm supposed to get invested in and really love the characters and really, know what's going on and how it works. So be cognizant of that. There are some ways to cheat, quote unquote. Maybe set your camera up and then put your bullet points or your questions that you want to do in like 200 font, and step back from the camera where I can't watch your eyes going back and forth, because you're too far away and I can't see that that's what's going on. And not that reading's cheating, but it definitely would give it a little bit more of a feel of like what's going on. Conversation. The other thing is none of y'all got judged or scored on the stuff in the background, or on your camera angles, but do keep in mind that everything you do, even when you're not talking, is part of the advocacy. So even though, like I said, you're not getting judged and you're not getting scored on it, it's still something that's going to affect people who are watching these. And I'm certainly a person, so I assume that affects me as much as it does anybody else. One hint on that, Mr. Is it Schreiner?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it felt a lot like you were laying me down on the floor and I was staring up to God, when you were giving your closing. And it was just distracting, not that it should affect anything. It's just I spent a good 30 seconds trying to figure out, why this looks like this, and I probably missed something of what you were saying. Other than that, Mr. McIntosh and whoever was Blair, I can't find you in the screen to know what your name is. I'm sorry. Y'all could teach a course on how to feel like you're really part of the story. I could be convinced y'all lived this last week. Much less are, trying to play a part. So, that's what we're looking for in these things, is someone who's, living it, someone who actually feels like it's going on, that is conversational. So with that, I'll go on to Mrs. Ease.
Hi all. So just a little background. I am a law student, and I did a lot of mock trial undergrad and high school and stuff. And I've done recently some advocacy on Zoom, and I really commend you guys for being so comfortable, because even doing it, just generally makes me so uncomfortable. And I think you guys did a really good job about that. I will echo a little bit that I'm going to say mostly negative things, just because I think you guys are both really good, and you don't need me to tell you that. I'm going to tell you a couple of things I think strategically that you could do better. I know this is your last round, but I'm sure that you'll compete again. And so you can maybe apply some of those things. One thing, just for the defense, and I think specifically for Harper, and I don't mean to catch it on you, but you are the defendant. I think it's okay to kind of own up that you don't like Genesis. I feel like that's okay. I think it was just a little disingenuous to hear half a trial of you kind of very specifically not liking him, and then when we get to your testimony, you're like, oh no, he's my family. I don't think you have to say that. I think that, this is obviously a very substantive thing that you guys can kind of discuss. I just think it's a little disingenuous, because then I'm like, he's totally BSing. And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. I think somebody was trying to, no, okay. But I just think it's okay to be like, look, I don't like him that much, but that doesn't mean I don't want him to die. I think there's definitely a difference there. And I think you can highlight that, because the whole time you were talking, I was like, he's not your family. You don't like him that much, because I've been listening to you say very mean things about him for a very long time. That's the first thing. Kind of away from the substantive focus, I think objecting strategically, I was a little, sorry about that. I was a little confused about what was going on with that objection. I think the defense brought something in, plaintiff objected, and then tried to bring in the exact same statement. I understand that on a technical sense, of course you were right. It was hearsay, and it was okay for you to bring it in because it's an admission by a party opponent. But I was like, why even bother? If it's coming in, let it come in. I just feel like strategically you can decide what battles to kind of take. And that's just my personal perspective. Of course, other people might take a different, approach to that. I just think that I was just strategically confused. I understand technically why that was correct. But anyway, for the witnesses, I say this a lot, and I practiced this when I did my thing. I think witnesses win or lose rounds. And I think one thing that just drives me absolutely crazy about witnesses is when witnesses fight too much, especially if you're witnesses that's a disinterested party. If you're just a random bystander who saw something and you're coming to talk about it, it's why do you care what happens at the end of the day? Because whether somebody wins or loses doesn't matter to you. And I think it's just it makes it very obvious that it's mock trial when you argue a lot. If it's something that doesn't matter, yes, just say yes or no. Who cares? I'm probably not even going to remember it. But if you spend 2 or 3 questions arguing about it, I'm definitely going to remember it. There was one example, honestly, I don't remember that much about specifics of the trial, but I specifically remember one witness was I wasn't drinking all night. And there was kind of an exchange about whether he was drinking all night or for a shorter period of time. And regardless of the substance of that, I just remember it. And if you had just said yes, I literally probably would not have remembered that specifically. So that's my one thing. On the other side, for attorneys, I think that there's a little bit more of an art you can employ for witness control. I think just saying is that a yes to my question is kind of a cheat. You can kind of do a couple other things to kind of guide the witness a little more in a way that's showing that you have the finesse to handle a witness that's being fighty and that's not giving you what you want, but also kind of guiding them in the direction you want. And I think that scores you points, because it shows me that you know more than how to just say the phrase, that's a yes to my question, right? And I think that there's a little bit of an art there. So one thing you could do is say maybe my question wasn't clear. Let me just rephrase that for you, and just kind of emphasize that you're trying to get to a specific answer and they're being the one who's being unreasonable, rather than you kind of coming down as the hard lawyer who's trying to make them do or answer in one very specific way. So I think that's generally my stylistic comments. But of course, these are all stylistic preferences, so you don't have to follow any of them. I just wanted to throw it out there for you guys.
Great. My name is Vic Davenigam, and I have been practicing well over 20 years. I've been a judge for the past 4 years of a trial court. So first of all, you guys, obviously, I'll echo the comments. You guys all did a great job. You've done this multiple times this weekend. I'm sure you're sick of all of this. I will tell you, this is my 3rd round I've judged this weekend. Just two things, and either side can take them. On the plaintiff side, I really feel like your whole case is circumstantial on some level, on the fact that something was put in the wine bottle. If you're the plaintiff and it's a circumstantial case, it would be helpful to have some kind of illustration at some point, whether that's during opening or closing, to acknowledge it's circumstantial, but circumstantial doesn't mean bad. prosecutors love to give the example of baking cookies, leaving them out, coming back when they're cooled off, and you walk in and you see a kid at the table with cookie crumbs on his face and on his fingers and a glass of milk. But you didn't actually see the cookie being eaten, but you know what happened. You don't even have to say. You look at them and say, you know what happened. We all know what happened. So if it's all circumstantial, acknowledge it, accept it, and show about how circumstantial evidence is just as strong. Sometimes it gets a bad rap. On the defense side, I feel like you have some good arguments, and then in this particular round, the one argument in the middle seemed a little bit I felt like it hurt the credibility. The argument in the middle, I think, was something like the wine, you can't prove that the wine had any insecticide. Well, there sure is a lot of evidence to support that the wine had insecticide. Maybe there's not evidence to support the martini put the insecticide in, but it seems like when you kind of harp on that as one of your arguments, it takes away the credibility from the other two better arguments that you have, which is no one saw it happen, and there may be more than one cause of death here. I thought those were more effective arguments that the other side couldn't really respond to. But when you start saying, well, it doesn't even have insecticide in it, we don't really know that, it hurts your credibility, even if you're on the defense and you don't have to prove anything, and that's great. A weak argument can kind of pull down the other two better arguments. So careful about, unless you're confident that it's a winning argument, it's better not to even put it out there. Outside of that, I know you guys want to get ready and move on and get some food and get ready for the next rounds or whatever you're doing. Y'all take care, be safe, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.